Hello, everyone, and welcome back to AuthorStory, the home of authors and stories that matter. I'm your host, Alexander Lim, and this episode's featured guest is C.Cervantes, author of the Stormrunner series and whose third book in the trilogy, The Shadow Crosser, will be coming out. All right, just came out recently. So, JC, welcome to AuthorStory. Thank you very much for being with us.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So, first off, I'd like to get a little bit into your background. Now, I know a lot of folks, they think about writing a book, but not that many do manage to write a book. So, did you ever think that you'd ever become a writer?
It wasn't something that I necessarily thought about in terms of I'm going to become an author. It
Okay.
really was a sequential process where I began writing a short story for my youngest daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and that just kind of grew into another story that I was writing the way that I read books, and I kept writing every day to see what was going to happen to the characters. And I would
Mm.
say, probably 30, 40, 50 pages in, I thought, oh my God, I think I'm writing a book. So it didn't start off with the goal of writing a book. I think that would have felt really big for
Oh,
me.
all right. So it just kind of grew organically then.
Hmm.
All right. Now this the storm. Now we'll go into these the Throne of Sanduology and the Stormrunner series later. But are these the only kinds of things you write about? I mean, do you write about anything else?
Yeah, I just completed another book that is part of a quartet with three other authors. I'm doing book three that
Mm-hmm.
is a young adult fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm currently working on a rom-com.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm writing things other than just for that age group, but also in terms of genre and content.
All right. Nice. Nice. And writers they always have their influences. Would you say who would you say your influences are when it comes to writing stories?
Oh gosh, I would say I've been I mean, I'm heavily influenced by the authors, obviously, that I read growing up. Some of the classics like C.S. Lewis
Mm.
and, Roald Dahl and those, Little Witch was a favorite of mine, Beverly Cleary. Later I really enjoyed Sharon Creech and Kate DiCamillo
Mm-hmm.
and Cameron Yost Ryan. But I've also been heavily influenced by poetry. I really love Pablo
Mm.
Neruda and Mary Oliver.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, in many ways, some of those books have been even more influential from a language perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but, I wouldn't say that there's one particular author that has been my influence.
Right, right. Okay. So, all right, multiple authors, right. Well, I guess it's commonplace. I mean, be influenced by the authors you read growing up.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. So, right. So, let's get into the Stormrunner trilogy now. Before anything else, for the benefit of those of us who know absolutely nothing about this trilogy, what is it about?
So the books open with the Stormrunner, and they are about a young boy who is 13 years old. His name is Zane Obispo, and he lives in New Mexico out on a mesa, and he has a volcano in his backyard.
Mm-hmm.
And the book opens with him having been homeschooled for the last year,
Mm-hmm.
and his mother tells him it's time to go back to school, in which
Mm.
he thinks that's the absolute worst fate. He has one leg shorter than the other, and he walks with a cane, and he is picked on at school by the other kids, and so he'd really rather just continue his homeschooling. And he soon finds out that he is at the center of an ancient Maya prophecy to release the god of death, darkness, and destruction,
Mm-hmm.
who happens to be imprisoned in his volcano.
Okay.
And he of course, says, no, I will absolutely never release him. Why would I do that? And of course, he does. So adventure ensues.
Right, right. And this is a young adult series, right? I mean, it's like Zane Obispo, the protagonist. He's in his teens, especially the start of
Mhm.
this, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. Cool. All right. So you mentioned that the Stormrunner is based on Mayan mythology. Now I know that the what's this? The Throne of Sanduology, another series of books you wrote. It's based on Aztec mythology. Now, Central American mythologies aren't really that, I don't know, for lack of a better word, mainstream or popular. So, what made you decide to write, book stories based on these mythologies?
Well, these are stories that I grew up with. My grandmother used to tell me stories of many Mesoamerican mythologies and
Mm,
civilization. And I, mostly Maya and a little bit of Aztec, and I was absolutely fascinated with them, especially when she would tell the tales of the god of death. And I
mm-hmm.
can remember going into the library at my school and asking for more literature on the topic, and was told that there wasn't any. And I can so clearly recall thinking, oh, well, they must not be important stories because they're not in a book.
Right.
And so, to get to bring those to life and, through obviously my own interpretation has been, it's just been really an incredible experience.
Right, right. And I'm sure you did like a deeper research into these mythologies. I mean, I mean, granted, getting them from getting stars in these mythologies from childhood, I'm assuming it would be very different from like actually doing the research and seeing what actually these mythologies are all about.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely very challenging to find a cohesive narrative just because of the colonization when the Spanish came over in the 1500s and
Right.
so many records were destroyed. And so, so much of that history has been put together by different archaeologists and historians and philosophers and so many. And I found that as I was doing my own reading, that there were very big differences in many of the accounts and many
Mm-hmm.
books. You have to look at who's writing that book and whose lens are you looking through. And many of them
Mm-hmm.
were very and Americanized. And so that's why it was important for me to go to original content, original resource as well with the Popol Vuh. And it was a really eye-opening experience for sure.
Eye-opening. Okay, because that leads to my next question. Because there's, I'm sure there are a lot of things that you you came across while doing research. What were some of the things that really surprised you when you were doing when you that you found out about these mythologies?
I found, well, one of the things that was really surprising to me is this idea of duality and gender fluidity. And, many of these gods and goddesses didn't have a gender or they switched genders.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found that really, really interesting. And I think one of the things that was really eye-opening for me too, and it was kind of, I think that I was feeling a little bit, probably a little bit sad at my own history education, in that this civilization, the ancient civilization of the Maya, were so incredibly advanced, from archaeology to timekeepers to astronomers. So it's in mathematics, their number system, their language system. And I didn't realize how incredibly advanced they were. And so that was really a joy to read about and learn more about. And it really kind of sent me down a rabbit hole of wanting to know more.
Right. Okay. All right. And all right. So I just like to go in a little bit of sidebar because you mentioned like how these mythologies are read by people. They differ from like author to author, and you did mention like the Spanish who who really clamp down. I mean, for lack of a better word for me, clamp down on these things. What sort of can you give us some sort of example of these kinds of changes between, say, the original and what is interpreted?
Well, I think that that's what's challenging, Alex, is we don't know what was the original. Um,
Mm.
the only thing that was left were about 4 or 5 codices, and they're not even complete, and they're around the world. And so it actually took archaeologists. What's fascinating is it was right around, I believe it was right around the time of World War II,
Mm-hmm.
immediately after, a soldier had stumbled upon a book and somewhere in Europe, and I'd have to go back and look at this documentary. And it started his obsession with wanting to know more and to decode because no one knew how to read the glyphs.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had over 800 glyphs that told stories, but no one knew. And so imagine spending your entire life trying to decode
Right.
these glyphs. And so it became his work and another woman, it became her life's work. And I found that so incredibly fascinating that they relied upon these glyphs that were found in the walls of the pyramids and at other archaeological sites.
Right, right, and the work paid off because I mean we get a glimpse. I mean, as you mentioned, there are
Yeah.
only 4 codices of these of these culture, and we do get deep glimpse into what they were all
Yeah.
about.
And the other thing that's really fascinating is when you learn about so many of these ancient civilizations, they had no connection to each other,
Mm-hmm.
and yet, they all had a god of death, or they all have a god of the sea, or they all have a
Mm-hmm.
god of the sky, or they all have a god of war. And I just found it so interesting that as humans, we are wired in this storytelling kind of way, in this mythology way, to understand our origins and where we come from.
Right, right. And yeah, I mean this there is a commonality, I guess, among all the different religions and all the different cultures of this world. I mean, as you mentioned, commonalities in the types of gods and deities and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Right, right, okay. So on to the book. First off, the protagonist Zan. I'm sorry, am I correct? Pronounce this correct? Zan
Zane
Obispo. Zane
is Zane.
Obispo. Okay, okay, my mistake. Zane Obispo. Okay. Oh gosh, okay. All right, JC, I just like to just mention that there's something screwy going on with my notes here. All right, okay. All right, so Zane Obispo. Now, the character changes over the course of the trilogy. I mean, essentially, stories are about characters changing, the main character changing over the course of time. So, who is Zane Obispo? You mentioned a bit of him at the start of the trilogy. Who is he at the start, and what are the sort of things that he has to go through when he undergoes his journey?
Sure. I mean, I think that he has a pretty incredible character arc, as do many of the characters that start off with the series and stay with it until the Shadow Crosser. Zane, when we first meet him, he's a highly intelligent young man. He has fears around not belonging. He's content to be alone. And yet, I still think that he longs to have friends. His best friend is his dog, Rosie, who he
Mm-hmm.
has saved. And over the course of the books and through the adventures he goes through, he soon learns what courage looks like,
Mm-hmm.
what loyalty looks like, what family is, what friendship really means, what does it really mean to belong, how does he define himself.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see him going from this kind of, nervous, unsure footing in the world to I'm ready to go do battle and utilize these newfound powers in a really positive way.
Right, right. And I mean, this seems to be I mean, other characters in this trilogy also seem to go through this process, right? I mean, uh, I'm sorry, all right, my notes are screwy here. I forgot the name of the female character. The oh, it's,
Brooks.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
we definitely find out, what is her deal with water? Why is she so afraid of water?
yeah,
She has her own issues in that she's a narwhal, she's a shapeshifter, but she can only shift into a hawk, whereas other narwhals can shift into anything. So she also has her own issues around, what she perceives as weaknesses. His uncle Hondo probably has one of the biggest character arcs in the whole series, and I can't talk a whole lot about that without
of
giving
course, yeah.
away
Read the book to find out. Yeah.
spoilers. But his character arc is probably one of the most touching for me as
Mm-hmm.
the writer.
Right, right. Were these characters are they kind of like based on people you know, or are these like characters that you just created out of essentially created from scratch?
I don't like to base characters on people I know because I
Ah, okay.
think that it then is not as organic to the story, and I
Right.
begin thinking about that person. And I
Mm.
really like my characters to be organic in their inception, just because then they take the story in really surprising ways. They say things that are really, really surprising to me, and that's always interesting as the writer. I think that if
Mm.
I'm thinking about someone I know, then I'm letting that dictate the story, and I don't like to do that.
Mm, okay, okay. And this brings up something I've been wanting to ask about your process. I mean, you did mention that these stories grew out organically. Now, I've interviewed a lot of authors, and from quite a few of them, I picked up that they work out an outline first, and they fill in the story or fill in the subject matter for what they're working on. How much of what you do is organic, and how much of what you do is like organized?
I learned to be an outliner because I used to write myself into corners.
Okay,
And so
right.
what I do is I like to come up with at least a good, I always know the opening scene. That's always what comes to me first
Okay.
when I'm working. and I always know what the end scene is going to be. So then it's just a matter of, filling in the desert between.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to come up with 4 or 5 pinch points, tension points, conflict points
Mm.
throughout the story. I actually chart this on a large poster board because I'm very visual.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I have those, I'll kind of loosely fill in an outline, but I fill it in so lightly that I leave room for surprise for myself, and I leave
Okay.
room for a new direction in the story, because as the writer, I want to be surprised too.
All
I
right.
think if I know every single thing that's going to happen, then I can get bored. And obviously, if I'm bored writing the story, then readers are going to be bored reading it. So that's generally what my process looks like.
Oh, okay, okay. Now about the characters, I mean, this goes back, I guess, to the organic way things go. Was there any time, ever a time when you started, on one track with a character, and then you realized the characters developed this way, and it's not going to work, and you had to do another thing?
Not that I can recall. Most of the
Okay.
characters, I get to know them so well through journaling and thinking about them and kind of writing in first person from their perspective, even though that's never going to go into the book.
Right,
And
right.
the characters do things that are surprising, but they never change the core of who they are in
Mm,
terms of, oh gosh, the characters, is likes chocolate today, but tomorrow they hate chocolate. I mean, I don't I, that kind of thing doesn't typically occur
right, right,
unless there's an organic change in their character that is supported by external and internal events.
right, right. Hang on. Yes, girl, stay there. Sorry, that's our cat. All right, okay.
That's
Yeah, she's calling for attention. Okay, so where were we? Okay, all right. So character. Okay, pretty cool. Okay, got that. Okay, cool. So when you're writing these stories, what for you is the hardest thing to write about? I mean, is it yeah. Anyway, yeah. What's the hardest thing for you to write about?
I think action scenes are always
Okay,
challenging for me
okay.
because you're writing such detail about physical movement that I actually have to get up and act them out to see,
Oh,
would this work? Would this not work? And so I put a lot of time and effort into action scenes, as I know, most writers do who write that sort of book,
right.
but they do not come easily for me.
Okay, okay. And conversely, what are the easiest kind of scenes to write out for you? For you to write out, sorry.
I love dialogue, but I love setting. I just feel like setting
Mm-hmm.
character in the book. And oh man, I have to actually really, I have to hold myself back because I will write setting for pages and no one wants to read that. So
Right, right.
that's probably the easiest for me.
Okay, so you can probably write something like 100 pages worth of describing just a single scene, can't you? All right. So these books, I mean, they're targeted towards a young adult audience. I got you told me that you have a daughter, and well, how is in your opinion, how is she taking this sort of thing? And her friends, how are the audience, in your opinion, taking these stories?
Well, I have 3 daughters, and they have all been with me on this journey. And, they all read my books. And I always
Mm-hmm.
tell them, you don't have to read them. I'm like, no, we want to.
Okay.
And I think that they feel, I mean, certainly a sense of pride because they have been with me watching, as most writers go through rejections
Yes,
and
yes,
years of working on your craft to get
yes.
better with no idea if it's going to pay off.
Right,
Um,
right.
but I think for them it's really fun and it's exciting, and they're all really avid readers, and so they really love the benefits of all the books that come their way.
All right, nice. Okay. So I've noticed, your books. I mean, the cover illustrations are pretty good. So I'm also curious about this one. Who does the illustration for your books?
That's Irvin Rodriguez.
Okay.
Yeah, and he does beautiful, beautiful work.
Hmm.
Just I love his art. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the covers are just so magical and they really capture the essence and the mood of each book.
Right. What's your process with him? I mean, does he like read the entire book before he makes his illustration? Because I know there's a process when it comes to putting the book together, right? I mean, the book does have a deadline before it comes out.
Yeah, so there's a whole team that works on it. So it's not just the editor and the writer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the editor, my editor, will typically reach out and say, what scenes do you think are really pivotal in the book you're, about a year, probably a little over a year before publication.
Right.
And then I don't work directly with the illustrator. That the illustrator works directly with Disney and my editor and that
Mm.
team. So any changes are done through them.
Right.
Um, and and so, usually there's two, three, four sketches. Is this the right direction? What do you think? And
Mm-hmm.
then we start getting down to detail once we know that, okay, that's the scene we want to do. The sketch looks great. What color T-shirt is he wearing in the scene? What is Rosie doing in this scene?
Right.
Is it going to be an action shot? That kind of thing.
Right. Right. Okay. Okay. And I mean, it comes out great. I mean, the illustrations look pretty good. So yeah, it sure
Yeah, he does
works. It sure
a good
works.
job.
Yeah, it's a great job. All right. So yeah. So you know, so this we're kind of winding down the interview right now. In this last few minutes or so, is there anything you'd like to tell our listeners? You'd like to share with them, uh, maybe even to like particularly would-be writers.
Oh gosh, one of the questions that I get a lot is, how do I improve my craft, or how do I become a
Okay.
writer? What's the best advice?
Yeah.
And I think, all of us are going to give different answers, but all of us would probably agree,
Right.
read widely. I think when you're reading a book and you're ingesting it
Right.
in a really deep way as a writer, because I think you read books differently as a writer than when you're just reading for pure entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
You learn a lot. And what I used to do is I used to take books that I really enjoyed and I would actually plot out the character arcs
Mm-hmm.
and plot, and I would make detailed notes. Why did I enjoy this particular scene? Or because then once I kind of got an idea of how someone else did it, then I could kind of imitate what they did until I found my own voice. But
Mm-hmm.
I would say, read widely and don't just read in a genre that you prefer. I mean, I
Right.
think it's really important to read nonfiction, adult fiction,
Right.
whether, and those aren't necessarily genres, but within those areas. So, romance. I always tell people read romance if you want to learn about character development. Read
Mm-hmm.
fantasy if you want to learn about world building. Read
Mm-hmm.
action adventure if you want to learn about pacing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that it's a really valuable thing to take the time. And I, even as busy as I am, I will always make time because it's part of building my own craft and developing my own craft. I
Mm-hmm.
read lots of books every
Mm-hmm.
year.
Mm-hmm. So you read all kinds. I mean, as you mentioned, like nonfiction,
Oh yeah,
romance. All, okay, great. So it's important then to read as well as just not just be a writer, but also to read widely then.
absolutely.
All right, great, cool. Okay, great. Okay then. So in closing then, our guest is author J.C. Cervantes. Her books are the Stormrunner trilogy. Sorry, and the last book is the third book in the trilogy. Is Shadow Crosser, and you can buy it on Amazon. So JC, thank you very much for being an author story. It was a lot of fun being able to speak with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, you're welcome. So everyone, check out G. Cervantes' book, The Shadow Crosser, as well as the other books in the Stormrunner trilogy. And also, please feel free to comment below and hit that subscribe button to listen to people and stories we'll cover in the future. So see you guys next time on Author Story, where we get to talk to another great author and hear about their story.